I'm going to talk about a little trauma thing. I'm going to talk about an 1845 expedition. That sounds fun.
Mm.
Uh, of 129 men led by the explorer Sir John Franklin from Great Britain for this Canadian Arctic exploration and passage. Um, and have you ever heard of this before?
I
Just
feel
fun.
like I might have, but honestly, I'm here for it. I love a good expedition story. Let's dig in.
Right. So this was it's called the Franklin expedition is what you may hear it. It says, and it was called there's a movie made about it, and I think it's named after the ship, which was called Terror, which was
Ship was called Terror.
I
I
believe
mean,
so, yeah.
like the USS Terror or something like that. It
I
seems like you're
mean,
asking for trouble.
right. Yeah, and I want to make sure. Hold on, let me double check. I'm pretty sure that was what it was called. Yeah, it was on, yeah, the HMS Terror. Hmm.
Okay, well, I think we need to rethink the choices there.
There's two ships. So one is the HMS Erebus, Erebus, yeah, Erebus, and the HMS Terror.
What does
Um,
Arubis mean?
I don't know. Now I'm gonna have to look it up because
Yeah.
I know what terror means.
Arubis sounds like it means something as well.
It's Greek mythology, is the personification of darkness.
Oh, so not that different.
Yeah. So in Greek mythology, he is the offspring of chaos and the father of Aether and Herma, which is darkness and night. In other Greek cosmogonies, he is the father of Eros, the first ruler of gods. So there you
Why are we
go.
naming our ships like Terror and Darkness and Chaos?
So basically, it's referring to the underworld because the ruler of gods and darkness is the underworld.
Okay.
And terror. Great. Yeah, no, that seems like maybe don't do
Maybe
that.
don't.
So
What's wrong with
there's
like a
this,
good old like liberty or spirit or something like that?
like, even just expedition sounds fun. Sure. So I'm going to give you the surface level, and
Okay.
then we'll get weird. So, Franklin's lost expedition. So both of these ships never returned. They were led by Sir John Franklin that departed England 1845. Um, they were assigned to traverse the last unnavigated sectors of the Northwest Passage in the Canadian Arctic, and they were to record the magnetic data to help determine whether a better understanding could help navigation with magnetic data.
Hmm.
Which was like cool. That's like science on a boat. Go get it.
Love
Um,
science on a boat.
Science on a boat. They both ships and their crew, so a total of 129 officers and men. Um, this is again this kind of the surface part of what if you just looked it up. Um, they became icebound. So they got stuck basically in the Victoria Strait near King William Island in what is today the Canadian territory of Nunavut,
So
whatever,
what's
after being.
icebound? Is that like when the water freezes around your ship and you can't move?
Yeah, I think yeah, basically like maybe surrounded where they can't get out because they were stuck there for a year. Year. So they after they ended up having to abandon the ships in April 1848, by which at that point 24 men, including Franklin, had died. The survivors, now led by Franklin's second in command, Francis Crozier, and Arubus's captain, James Fitzjames, set out for the Canadian mainland. So they then left and disappeared, presumably to have perished. But again, this is a lot of presumably, is a lot of kind of guesswork that's happening. So I do have because I think I can drop this in the chat for you, a little picture of of the journey map. I think I can do this. We'll see. What? Wait, are you still there?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Okay, hold on. I did something weird. Where did you go? Wait, okay. Exit out of that. Okay, there we go. Okay, there you go. So if you pop that bad boy open, so you can see where they're like going to what is there's Greenland up at the top, and it's actually it looks like it'd be pretty hard to navigate through all those like straits. Like there's like all the like islands
Yeah.
that they have to get through. And excuse me. Okay. So
It does look difficult to navigate.
yeah, I mean a jaunt in modern day airplanes, but on a boat in the cold would be challenging. So, pressed by Franklin's wife Jane and others, uh, they they started a search. So, like, it wasn't even just an automatic thing to go and find them. They had to get a lot of pressure to have this launch for the missing expedition in 1848. So there's been subsequent searches decades later, where several artifacts were found from the expedition, including the remains of two men, which were studied in Britain. Um, so in this study, they have found, and this is so modern studies, they found that that the men did not all die quickly. So hypothermia, starvation, lead poisoning, zinc deficiency, diseases including scurvy, along with general exposure to hostile environment, including lack of clothing, nutrition. Those were all listed as things that impacted the people on the expedition. It killed, and and those things killed everyone on the expedition years after it was last sighted by the whaling ship in July of 1845.
Can I
So,
recap? So
yeah,
first the terror went, and what happened to them? They disappeared too?
both ships went out at the same time.
Oh, they went at the same time. Okay.
So they were together.
And nobody ever came
And
back.
no, and there's just documentation showing the first kind of group of people dying, and then the second group leaving the ships to go try to get to mainland and then disappearing. And in remains that have been found in modern day times, so all those they're like all these things. So it wasn't like a these weren't quick, sudden deaths. These are deaths that they saw like lead poisoning, they were able to track through the body over time.
Hmm.
Hypothermia that was lasting, starvation lasting, and zinc deficiency lasting, scurvy over time.
You
So very,
scurvy dog.
yeah, like it all sounds very painful and awful. And
Isn't
killed everybody.
oranges like vitamin C the cure for scurvy?
Yeah, I think that was one of the things was like vitamin C was one of the big, like if they would have just had that, it would have been nice, some tablets.
And maybe some warm
Um,
blankets also might have made a difference.
maybe, yeah. Well, and it made me think too of your bathroom situation on the cruise ships topic.
The poop
Like,
cruise?
yeah, like, are they all going far enough away to go potty? I don't know. It's cold
Probably
out there.
not. I mean, if it's
Hmm.
cold, who wants to drop
Nobody,
trow over the side of the deck, you know? Who knows? I
nobody
don't know.
wants,
How did it work?
nobody wants to drop trout.
Did they do it in a bucket and then throw it over the edge? How
Probably.
does all this work?
I mean, that wasn't my focus, but maybe next time.
We need an expedition insider from the 1800s to tell us how
To
it
tell us how
works.
pooping worked. Yes. So,
And then if it's just ice below, it's not going to go in the water, right? It's just going to
right,
be
just like hang
surrounding
out.
your ship.
Sorry, I admittedly have not brushed my hair today. Got a ponytail. It's Sunday.
Sunday fun day.
Sunday. So obviously the expedition failed, but it did succeed in exploring the vicinity of what was really an unknown area. And it did get explored later on. Robert McClure led one of those expeditions that investigated the fate of that expedition. And his expedition returned after finding that icebound route. So he found where they got stuck, and it's the spot that connected the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. The Northwest Passage was not navigated by boat until 1906, so that whole thing wasn't there
What
yet.
happened to those boats? Because those are big boats,
These are ships, yeah.
ships. What happened to them?
So,
Is that part of the mystery?
I think, well, yeah, I mean, they're not there now.
Okay.
I'm assuming that. I did not read that specifically, but maybe I'll hit it somewhere where I didn't see it. So
Because like eventually the ice is going to melt and they would float somewhere, I would assume, or do they sink?
why do you think eventually the ice would melt?
I mean, is it always icy there? Is it passable or some parts of the year, or is it always
I think that
iced?
place is like, yeah, I think that spot is like a should not have been gone, but they didn't know. They didn't know where to go. That was the whole point. And the Northwest Passage is kind of that's the way you go to get through because it's treacherous.
I mean, eventually you could like fly over the area with an airplane or something, or hike
Eventually,
there.
maybe you
So there
want
was
to do that
nothing there when
sometime.
they went. There was no ships. They were just
Right,
gone. So, okay.
right. So in 2014, a search team, it's weird how it's like always like current search teams, led by Parks Canada, actually located that wreck spot of Erebus. So that's the first ship in the eastern portion of the Maud Gulf.
So it was like sunk. It was like at the bottom of the sea there.
Um,
What do they mean wreck
yeah,
spot?
I mean they say dive expedition, so I'm assuming that there's like because they say both wreck site and like a dive area.
Okay.
So maybe they were able to locate where it happened and then that. But the uh
That's
two
probably
years
proof
later,
evidence.
yeah, it wasn't until 2 years like, later that they found where the terror was at, which was south of Kings William Island in the body of water named Terror Bay.
Oh, coincidence? Or did they name it after the ship?
Um, I was gonna say I don't. Hold on, because I actually thought I had the answer, and I don't think it's.
Terror Bay.
It says
That's
that,
fun.
yeah, like it says it has the same name. It was officially named by the Geographical Names Board of Canada in 1910. In a lot of this, by the way, a lot of the like records is actually by the Inuit peoples of the area. So they were the ones that actually their oral history provided clues about where the ships had crashed. So that's how they got a lot of the navigation. Precise locations weren't known for 160 years, but they gosh, I mean, it sounds like they probably named it after
Okay.
that. Because before, all I'm seeing is the previously it was just part of the Baffin Bay. Like they go into the Baffin Bay, and then
Well,
um,
and yeah, and probably the indigenous people probably had a different name for it before all this.
mhm, correct. Well, and that's what yeah. I mean, and I am very curious about because the Inuit people, they are the traditionally inhabited the whole Arctic and subarctic regions around there, which included Greenland, so the upper part, Quebec, the Yukon, Alaska, and so it would be really interesting to know what more of that oral history looked like
Yeah,
when we
and
get
it's
the
always
watered down
interesting to
version.
me that Greenland is very icy and Iceland is very green.
That's like this that like weird. piece of knowledge that like every child ends up learning and you don't really know why.
I'll never unlearn that. It's stuck
It's
in
just,
there.
I think it's like one of those like you're learning something else from it, which is like it's not always what it seems sort of deal. Maybe that's why it's so memorable. Yeah, or yeah. So,
Naming conventions don't make
mhm.
sense.
So with the Inuit record keeping, it was all historically oral, so it wasn't until much later on that it started becoming written. So it okay, here. Let me bounce back. Okay. So anyways, that's the Terror Bay part of it. And so I'm just going to go down my other track, which is that the again, it took a lot of pressure from other people to even get them to look into how they disappeared. And it was actually kept alive and talked about the most through the Inuit folklore. So it became part of like historical event tracking and kind of the legend.
And what was their
That
take
was
on it?
so it's actually one of the most well-established like historical events that's talked about in the Inuit
Hmm.
oral traditions. Um, it's the tale of the lost ships that have survived until the present day. So the way that they talk about it, let's see here. So this is by the explorer Sir Francis Leopold McClinton. Um, so it's the first Inuit account recorded by an Irish explorer, again, because it's oral at the time. It was told that one of Franklin's ships had been driven ashore by the ice in the marine and known as Utgulik between Riley Island and Royal Geographical Society Islands. And the much of the history that was unraveled was done by looking at is about from a ship in the same area from an Inuit whose name he rendered as Nukakichiuk in 1860, and Nukakichiuk described the ship as beset in first-year ice, with 4 boats hanging in davits along its sides and one at the stern. A gangplank led from the deck down to the ice, and the deck was housed over with canvas. The Inuit felt that a party of men had wintered on board the ship, and later tracks, not thought to be those of the Inuit, were found on shore. So
So they
they
got off
obviously
the
were
ship and
keeping,
walked around then because it was all
well,
icy.
well, they were saying that they were on it for a year and then they left.
Because they're
And
like, this is not thawing. We got to get out of here or we shall perish.
right. Nuki Chiuk and others went aboard and found the corpse of a large man, fully clothed and smelling badly. They ransacked the ship for items that they could use, because again, the people had left, returning after, like the term ransack, but they they took what was abandoned, for items that they could use. Returning after some time, they found that the ship had sunk, although the masts were still sticking out of the water.
Hmm.
Subsequently, large
Okay,
amounts of
so it
lumber
sunk.
Subsequently, large amounts of lumber and wreckage drifted ashore. Um, again, this is per their account. So a similar story was recounted by Inuit to a different Inuit person to another explorer who, you know what? I'm not going to say these explorers' names because they don't say the Inuit people's names. They did the first one, but this one they don't. I don't think that's fair. So as the ships were abandoned by both crews in the summer of 1848, one of them could have only reached this location if some members had returned to the ships and managed to sail it south. But remarkably, consistent versions of this account are still current in nearby Inuit communities, which have helped explain the ship's location.
Hmm.
So the these encounters have been passed on generation to generation, and sometime between 1994 and 2008 in Cambridge Bay, Victoria Island, Analoch believed that a ship had wintered off the south coast, the most northerly large island, and with some of the crew camping on the shore. The ship departed the following summer and could be the one which had ended up off of one of the other islands. So at some point, one of the ships sailed out,
It got
at
out.
least to a different point.
It
Yes.
got un-ice locked.
Right. Which then becomes interesting because we had a year and then tracks, one large dead man on the boat.
Smelling
But like,
badly.
and the ships were intact for a year,
How
upright.
long would you wait? If your
And then,
ship
but
was
like they came
stuck,
back,
would you wait
but
a
they came
year?
back and the ship was sunk. Like why all of a sudden the ship is sunk after all that time?
Where did they go? Were they just camping on the shore? Or were they trying to find their way to civilization where people were to get help?
So, but they leave, right? They're
Yeah.
gone. And then somehow the other ship had people, someone had to drive the other ship, drive it, I don't know, steer it to another location for the other
Maybe
ship.
all the people from the first ship got on the second ship
Well, but that's what they're saying is that that
because they wanted to get away
they're,
from the stinky large man.
I mean, maybe. So it said some of them were camping on the shore. Ship departed the following summer. So they were, that's like, it's just like a weird amount of time and spacing. And so
I wouldn't
that
wait a
attempt,
year. Honestly, I wouldn't wait that
no,
long.
that's a long, I mean, I guess they're used to like long travel. We were just talking about life being short, right? And it's like their expeditions would last like 10 years. No thanks. Um,
I'd be putting
so,
on my rucksack and I'd be hiking out of there. Try to
so
find a train or something. I don't know.
I should try. So they had been trying to find the location of the ship since 2008, and they had been pretty unsuccessful in finding them. Um, so the proposed search area, like it was pretty wide. So the Inuit, it really did help them find
Yeah.
where they were at. It was a helicopter pilot who made the first find, officially with a fork-shaped metal object, later identified as part of the ship's davit that they were able to see.
What's a
And
davit?
then I don't know. And they said a fork-shaped metal object.
Okay.
Um, an archaeologist then found a wooden Haas plug, which bore the Royal Navy broad arrow symbol. Both artifacts were flown into Ottawa. So now they're starting to find chunks. Investigators were lowered and started towing a side scan sonar towfish in a grid pattern. They got a very clear image of a large wooden ship sitting upright on the seabed, only a depth of only about 11 meters.
So do we
This
know
depth,
if that was the Terror or the Arubis that they found?
um, I don't. There were the ships themselves were pretty identical, so it's kind of impossible to say which one it was. They both weighed the same. One was at like 370 tons, one was at 340. They looked pretty exact. Um, they did send an underwater team at one point, hoping to like dive in and look before there's like apparently a small window before it like freezes. So
So this is
some
like
artifacts,
you can sail through here, but like you have a little window.
right?
And
If
if
the weather
you
holds.
screw that timing up, then you're landlocked for until it unfreezes in a
Yeah.
year.
Right, right.
This is like,
So
when you're going down the sidewalk and someone has their sprinkler crossing the sidewalk and you're kind of like time it and you gotta like just run through
you either have to
right at
decide
that
I'm just going
perfect
to get
time.
wet. Right, right. So they're basically saying too, like there's probably going to be more and more stuff that's uncovered because even just for the time for them to, because you're relying on weather and timing, and that's going to vary as well. So it's not an exact science of when to go. It reminds me of like people who go like extreme snowboarding and stuff. Like they plan it, they map it, and then they get there and the weather shifts and this big storm comes and they can't go, it's too dangerous. So we'll probably see more stuff show up about this ship.
So is stuff preserved because it's cold water?
Hmm. And 11 meters is not that far down. It's just freezing so fast. So um, the the depth of the water really confirms the Inuit people's account of the ship's mast sticking out of the water too.
Mm.
The vessel appeared to be almost completely intact.
That must have been so interesting to see.
The
Just
masts
like
were
the
missing.
top sticking out like that.
Right. The masts are missing now, but a remotely operated underwater vehicle was able to see some pretty clear images of the ship, which I'll send to you, and you'll be able to see some of those, including some of the deck planking, a cannon, things like that. So there's the discovery was the result of two fortunate coincidences, is basically what they say, which was heavy ice conditions further north, which obliged the expedition to focus south, just kind of by axe, that happened. So let's look down here. And that's where they happened to find that in the underwater search. So they weren't even intending to look there at first.
So they found one site, but they didn't find the other ship that
Um,
left.
correct. So
Okay.
you know what? Here, just for the sake
So
of
we
you
still
seeing.
don't know where that other ship is.
So I'll show you the sonar image. It's just kind of a creepy picture, honestly. Because you don't see the water, obviously, but it's a little eerie how intact it is, just
Well,
sitting.
yeah,
See it?
that is so weird. It's just sitting there. Why can't you see the water? That's so weird.
It's sonar.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. So, um,
How do you feel
oh
about underwater exploration? Like, would you do that? Do you like to go under the water?
no, no, I've almost drowned. I don't rather not do that.
You like to stay on top of the water?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I've been surfing before too, and just that like when you do just go under that little panic moment of, okay, I'm not a fish. I'm not a fish. Silly me. So they did find some, there was that happening did lead to them discovering more areas and other ships being able to not go that way. Like again. So now I'm gonna kind of pause on that. So now
Okay.
we're gonna get a little interesting. Just a little. Oh, sorry. Okay, so now, now comes this little statement, this one sentence I skipped over, which was that, which was that there were suggestions of cannibalism, allegations of
Oh,
cannibalism based on cut marks on some of the bones recovered.
so they ran out of food, and
Hmm.
I guess they weren't skilled at ice fishing.
Well, and it might be too cold and like at the depths of the water, like maybe that's not an area that's even possible.
That's where you got
Yeah.
to be friends with the locals because they hook you up. They're like,
Which obviously they
if
weren't.
you're cool, like you and get along, you could like learn some where the good ice fishing spots are.
Which
Maybe
they
trade
didn't.
some whatever you have on your ship.
Well, and I can imagine though, like you're out there exploring, it's a scientific thing, so maybe they didn't have like weapons or anything potentially. I mean, I guess they had cannons, but um they may not have
I'm
been
sure they
very,
had weapons.
I'm sure that I said it and I was like, I'm sure they did. So
I mean, a
they
year is a
had,
long time. I can see like how long are you expecting to be gone? Like what are your stores like? I mean, if you're only thinking you're going to be gone 6 months, then you're only packing food for 6 months. And if you don't know how to get food, out there in the wild, then the situation can turn dire pretty quickly.
So going back to the Inuit peoples, they are the ones who have shared. So I wanted to like support the stance of what they had been telling in their stories had been accurate up to this point. Um, they have also been sharing tales of cannibalism of Sir John Franklin's last expedition. So that is part of their legend in the stories is the cannibalism.
So they
Um,
witnessed something.
and
What did they
researchers
see?
now And now researchers are saying that they have found some evidence to back this up. So,
They're like,
re
these crazy white people, what are they doing out on that ship?
right.
Eating
Researchers
each
from the
other?
University of Alberta in the UK, they looked at the remains from 36 cracked bones found on King William Island, uh, which is now Nunavut. The bones show signs of breakage and polishing, which is consistent with heating and water to facilitate marrow extraction.
Mm,
So you and I have talked a lot about oddly bones and fire and like how people like with when people try to like burn bodies, what happens to the bones
yeah.
and how that's often used to tell things
Sounds like
about.
they're making a bone broth.
Right. Well, and it's again, these are scientists and stuff, and they're like, we need to eat the marrow.
Good for the collagen as well.
And
Keeps the
so
skin firm.
So we're able to tell through easy forensics, basically, that the polishing, the heating and water happened on the bones and why that would be done, which is to get the marrow out from the inside. And let me rephrase again, this is about cannibalism. So this is about eating and boiling the bones of someone on your ship
Your
to
pals.
eat the marrow out. With the cut
They
marks
like what did
shown.
they try? Like how fast are we resorting to that? Is it like day
So
two, or
so
are
this
we
that's the
really
part
starving and
that's
you
the
can't
part
figure it out?
three of this is a term was used and I went, wait, what? And so they phrased this as late stage cannibalism. And I went, stages.
Late
And
stage?
yes, and so I'll tell you the stages because I
Yeah, I'm not
also went
familiar with the cannibalism stage model.
stages. Right. So they said that this is consistent with late stage cannibalism. So in 1845, Franklin commanded that, just kidding, sorry, totally just read the same thing. Okay, okay. Late stage cannibalism, let's talk about it. Uh, Cannibalism tends to occur in stages, per May, this person, expert, uh, with people first feeding on the biggest cuts of meats for calories.
Okay. Like your rump roast situation.
Right, which we've talked about. Like I would eat you. We talked about that. You said have to give consent, and I said I'd take a head nod. As time goes on, which is true. I think I even said too, like we're like assessing each other, like which body, like, and we were talking about like the fatty bits versus the like too
Yeah.
lean. So people think about
Versus
that.
like a
Other,
finger.
yeah, I guess people think about that more often, like in these situations,
Okay. So
not ahead
that's
of
what she
time.
means by late stage. Like we're getting
So
we've already ate the good bits.
right. So as time goes on, they progress and invest more and more effort trying to get nutrients out. So that means that you start getting to things like the bones. And the final stage is because at this point, like the bones may have been there now. So they may have
Yeah.
eaten that and then had no intention of doing that. And they
Yeah.
get to this place where the final stage is to break up the bones and the marrow. And that's what they were seeing. So researchers say that the men on the ship practiced cannibalism, which was talked about for years and years within the Inuit people. Um, and they they said that the bone remains were located in multiple sites. So they said that they were practicing cannibalism over time. Remember earlier how I said they listed all these things as happening to the bodies over time?
Yeah.
This too was something it made me think of the Don was it Donner's Pass, the topic that you did?
No,
There you
we've
go.
never done Donner's Pass. I
Sorry,
did
not Donner's Pass.
the
It referenced
Rugby
it, but the
plane crash in the
yes,
Andes in the 70s, which they just
right, right, right.
did another movie recently on that.
Right. So that made me think of how it was, I mean, it was almost like it was, well, not almost, it was a last resort.
Yeah.
And it was like the thing that happened before like last ditch efforts were made. And this though sounds so odd to me that it's multiple sites over time.
What does that mean to you?
It means to me that like there was I guess I don't know what it means fully, but it doesn't mean last ditch effort to me. It means some strategic planning went into it, in my opinion. Like
Maybe there were
here's what we,
factions. Maybe it was like
yeah,
Survivor, and there were
yeah.
alliances.
Or even like I could see the like pulling straws of like, but like planning it out. Like, okay, so we're trying to get here. If we don't get here by this time, then we have to do this. Like it, because
Then it's
multiple
John's
locations,
turn.
right? But again, it's not just okay, now it's Naomi's turn and just your juicy bits were gone. It would you'd be able to show that like over time stages happened but in different locations. So that means that they carried things with them. Like
It seems
they would
heavy
have to.
and gross.
Right. But
But
they didn't
I
take
guess
that
you
one
got to
from
pack a
Batman.
lunch.
Right. So it said that they were also able to prove that in the final throes, so towards the very end of the expedition, not only did they eat the human flesh to survive, but they, like I mentioned with the marrow, so they specifically were boiling the bones. So they had enough wherewithal to do that process.
Yeah.
So there were people that were well enough to do that. Um,
I thought by
there,
stages you were gonna say something like first we eat the people we don't like.
I think there may be something like that. I'm sure there's some psychology that goes into it. I just probably we need to be the first researchers, I think, into that. Pretty sure.
Yeah. And I'm
Um,
also curious about, I'm sure there's research on this, like, is part of the stages not just like the good bits and then you're getting desperate and there's not much left, but are we eating the bits that are less human first and like maybe last you're going for like a face or something? Just
I
because
mean, that
the
makes sense
more
with
it's
like,
a human being, the more like repulsive it would be too, I guess. Or
yeah,
disturbing. Maybe it's not repulsive, but like upsetting.
right, right. And they did actually find like kettles with uh heating vessel, like so they they found in those areas like the kettles used for the
Yeah.
boiling too.
And are
Um,
we like in the plane crash one that I did, like the people were dead. That they're yes, it was their friends and it was very
and
upsetting,
that's what
but
makes me
they
think that
were
they weren't
dead.
dead. So to
Like were these
me,
people being killed to be
well,
eaten?
and that's what I was like, it says that these were prolonged deaths. So that's what feels odd to me is it feels like it's over time, it's over different locations. It
Are
feels
you
strategic.
saying, Macy, that like they're eating them while they're alive? Like eating
I
enough that just
Yeah.
enough where it's not killing them?
But- Yeah, because like
Oh
some of
my
the things
God.
in there, like it's like slowly dying of malnutrition. Okay, that makes sense. Slowly
Yeah.
dying of what was the other one I said?
Hypothermia,
Of hypothermia.
scurvy,
Okay.
zinc
So
deficiency.
how can they be getting this data showing these causes of death and yet they were cannibalized?
So interesting.
I mean, I guess okay, what they froze to death and then they ate them, but that's not
Yeah, I can't imagine you would
consistent.
be able to lose too much and be able to live. Like probably some non-essential parts, but I think you'd get infection pretty quick.
But the causes of death were things that were more
Yeah.
related to physical ailment. So
Isn't it really fascinating that we have such a strong will to survive that will do this. Like I've never been that hungry, thank goodness, that I've had to like think in these realms. But that's just like that will to survive, that you really will do anything, is
Right.
fascinating.
Well, and I mean, and again, just the pure dismissal of uh the people who live there, like all of their accounts over time have been true and they
Yeah.
were dismissed. And um one of the stories that they heard in the elder community in the early 1980s was that there was this like really gruesome recounting of a tent found near a lifeboat in the 19th century where there was they lifted up the tent that was like down. There's a dead white man there. There was a pot and in it human remains. So like that's one of the recounts, but was
These
never
Inuit are
initially
probably like,
mentioned.
WTF. Like,
Right.
I can see why they
So
didn't go teach them where the good ice fishing spots were. They're probably like, this is cray cray.
So yeah, and so the according to Kamukak, people in the area were told to stay away from these spots to avoid bad spirits. Bad
Yeah.
spirits referred to what they were seeing, these white men eating each other. So
Why are we
they
naming our ships Terror and Darkness and Chaos? I feel like there's a
right.
connection there too.
Well, and we talked about like why aren't they like engaging with people in the area? Well, people in the area come over and they're discovering tents have collapsed and they're like, what's happening? And they lift it up. And again, okay, the dead white man with a pot of human remains, there's food. So it's to me not the person who's being eaten that's sick and dying, it's the person that's eating them that's
Mm.
sick and died. Because if you have the food, then why are you dying? Probably from the hypothermia. But
Mm.
then what happened? Then what about these other people that are being eaten?
Yeah. How about Guy in the Pot? What happened there?
Yeah, who got in the pot? Um,
I'm,
okay,
I'm
so
thinking of a Stephen King short story I read a long time ago, but it's about a guy
which
that
one?
gets stranded on like an island and he starts to, because he has no food, he starts to eat himself. I think he starts with the fingers and yeah.
That's pretty messed up.
Oh, it's Stephen King.
Would you do that?
See, I've never been driven to this point. I mean, I don't know. It seems like people will do anything to survive, so I just don't know. I mean,
I've seen so
there's a
many people
guy
do
that
so
cut
little
his
to
own
survive.
arm off, in that movie he's portrayed by James
Saw
Franco, which is another deeply disturbing thing.
that picture just now is ones where that just like a depiction of what they kind of trade the boat being stuck as.
Okay, well, that looks
Uh,
like really big, dangerous ice.
yeah, really big, dangerous ice,
Like
correct?
that ice is way bigger than the ship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You ain't going anywhere anytime soon.
Here is so this is a little graphic. Some years ago, so first of all, cannibalism has happened apparently on the seas for a long time, like for people who get stuck on boats. Um, it's apparently not very uncommon in the back in the day. And
Hmm.
animals we've talked about that kind of briefly before, but animals have, cannibalism is a thing. Um, maybe eating your own kind. So there's a lot of taboo as well within that, just within society.
What's that
Uh,
picture? Is that one of the people on this expedition?
this is let's see here. This person was found on the raft at the Medusa in infamous 1810 incident where 151 persons were crowded on a raft and shipwrecked. Um, due to drunkenness and fighting that broke out, it then resorted to cannibalism within just a few days. So this is
See,
someone
that
that was
seems
found.
fast.
Right. Well, and so I was like, that's like how panicked, like and they were maybe drunk and fighting and like not liking each other, and so they ate each other really fast. And but you don't know. Like that we talked like the research study where they put the rats in the bucket of water, the rats that were taken out periodically, but then put back in, like their heart rates were lower. Like there was a sense of hope, and that kept them going. The rats that didn't have that like periodic out that was consistent, the panic was much higher, and their body, the panic response was just so
That's a
high.
very quick decision to make after 3 days, I'm just saying.
Yeah, but but you don't know, especially in that realm, no phone, no internet, like you just might assume that's what's going to happen. That may have been actually the better bet back then. But so what I read was that there's like a big difference between survival cannibalism, but the first and probably the worst type is predatory cannibalism. And that's when
Right.
a person is attacked, killed, and then eaten. The most commonly, so the picture I sent, that's the most commonly referenced one because it was so fast and it involved alcohol and fighting, that it was predatory, and then the cannibalism
Mhm.
happened after. Um, the next category,
That's
I
like
learned a lot.
murder is involved.
Yeah, but the thing is like there's intent to cannibalize, like there's intent because
Okay.
it was a crowded boat. So at some level, so there's survival involved. It's not just like, oh, it's not like serial killer level, like or what's the, can't, oh, Hannibal Lecter, like I like to eat people. It's not that because we're crowded. There is a survival factor. And so like there's a logical path, but it's very intentional and predatory to
Like they
make it
know the
happen.
end game.
Right. And it's targeted versus random and oh my gosh, so and so died and I'm horrified that I have to do this. It's kind of a different thing. So I learned a lot about cannibalism.
Yeah, I
So the
remember when
next,
I did the Andes plane
yeah,
crash that they did say that there's another word that they don't like the word cannibalism, that there's another word
there's
where
a
it's
lot of
just
stigma,
about survival.
right? And that's where I think the stages and categories. So the next category is exploitative cannibalism. Perhaps a starving crew, drew lots collectively, decides on the sickest or otherwise least likely to survive. So in practice, the knife falls to the lowest ranked among them. Back in the day, slaves were killed for food on the ships Peggy 1765 and Tiger ship in 1768. They were eating cabin boys because nothing less than that was like a pretty that was what was considered a seafaring tradition in the 19th century.
You just snack on a
Francis,
cabin boy?
yeah, Francis
Is it because they're
Fox,
low rank or
yeah, 1836. There was it was told in a book or I don't know what
is
this would
he
be
okay? I
called.
have to go back to the cabin boy thing. Are
Okay.
we eating them because we're starving, or are we just eating them because that's just a
This is
tradition?
exploitative, which means that um, so it means they're hungry. So this is still cannibalism in the sense that there's something happening,
Okay.
but
It's
so
not
like
just for sport, is what I was trying to
right.
clarify.
Yeah,
Okay.
not just for sport. So there on like one hand it could be, okay, who's the sickest? You know, you're less likely to survive, so we're going to use you. That's exploitive because that person's like, wait, what? And then the cabin boy scenario is like you're the lowest ranked, but that was pretty common to have that happen in instances like that. And then there were several other ships, 1874, and then Mignonette in 1883. And then in the final case, the three men stranded in the Mignonette, they were stranded on a lifeboat, and they decided to kill and eat the cabin boy. They had been starving. Um, they had ignored life-saving potential of their crewmen, especially when those comrades died of natural causes. So
Remember that movie
scavenge
Cabin Boy?
cannibalism. No. What is it?
It's okay.
Okay. So there's a book and a movie called Alive, which centered around the survival of the rugby team.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so
And they made a movie, and that one had Ethan Hawke in it, but they just made a new movie just recently.
that's what it would be the example of scavenge cannibalism. So it's basically like after a lot of debate, the survivors ate their frozen friends to survive out of options with dead people on hand. That's would be the common course, common sense act, where the exploitive and the targeting isn't necessarily common sense. And it is, I would say, greedy on some levels of my life means more than your life.
Yeah, it's
So
very preemptive versus like, okay, this is the situation. Now I got to deal with it.
and then there is a final category, which is self-sacrificial cannibalism. So in
Oh,
1809, 21 men escaped the sinking Negotiator for the ship's longboat. After 2 months, only three survived. Three drew lots, and the unlucky man selected. The doomed man gallantly cut his own wrists, bled out, and was eaten. In a weirder 1750 example, the selected man asked to be butchered alive so that he might eat his own flesh, but was refused and murdered. Even so, the man in the second example consented to his own death in order so his crewmen might be saved. So
that's really
he wanted,
strange.
well, yeah, he's like, well, I mean, okay, I drew the lot, but can I just like cut off my arm too and like see if I survive and eat me too? Like, is that a
And they're like,
thing? And they
no,
said,
because we want all of you. Probably was the
well, and
reasoning.
probably like you're injured then, and we have to take care of you, and you might get sick, and then we might not be able to eat all of you because you're sick now, maybe jaundice. I don't know. Maybe
I
there
think
was
he was
some,
trying though. I mean, he's trying to bargain. He's
right,
throwing some
right.
ideas
And he
out.
consented. He consented at that
He's
point.
brainstorming. I gotta give him credit there.
Right. And I mean, ultimately, we don't really know what happened in those end months, like to like what category these things are falling under. Giving the benefit of the doubt would be that it was the last ditch effort and that they were either, maybe they were all surviving but sick and people were volunteering as they went, and that's why location and over time. Or it was strategic and done in a way where people either of power and position ended or people of strength and smarts. Who knows? So we don't fully know.
Yeah,
And that's my topic.
so interesting. Good topic.
Yeah.
So
I learned a
1850
little.
expedition through the Northwest
Fra-
Passage.
Franklin's Lost Expedition.
Okay.
Yeah, accurately told by the Inuit people first since ever, and then it has to be verified by white men later because being verified by white men from a different country somehow makes it more valid. It's pretty ridiculous, and they were right in every account.
Yeah. And so there was nobody ever made it out. They
No,
all
no.
perished out there in some way or shape or form.
Hmm. Yes, exactly.
How many people altogether?
It was what did I say, 125.
Oh, it's a lot.
Yeah, but over a year. Yeah.
Well, I still say,
So cannibalism is not rooted in mental illness. I just looked up the psychology part of it based on your other question. It's not mental illness. Factors like substance abuse, antisocial traits, and environmental upbringing can contribute to cannibalistic acts, but it is linked with survival instincts
yeah.
stemming from trauma and abuse. That's interesting. I didn't. This is on by the way, this is a peer-reviewed article on the in the National Library of Medicine. Just saying. Um,
Well, I think the trauma could just be being stuck on a ship for a year in the middle of nowhere.
mhm. Right. The Oh, what is this? Cannibalism is deeply ingrained in the cultural and mythological heritage of the Algonquin speaking tribes. It's closely associated with the symbolic figure of the Wendigo. I have to look that up. The Wendigo serves as a warning about the potential loss of one's humanity in dire circumstances like starvation. Wendigo psychosis is characterized by a psychiatric manifestations such as paranoia, anxiety, hallucinations, and cannibalistic urges, often emerging as a result of fusion of cultural narratives and psychological vulnerabilities. It is internal distress. Historical records show that instances of Wendigo psychosis and cannibalism are more prevalent during periods of extreme scarcity and famine. Um, but can exist in non-famine contexts. There's a lot. So across various cultures, cannibalism exists in a lot of different traditional forms as well. Yeah. Yeah, I want to learn more about that part that you asked though. That's why I'm like, at what point do you decide to go for the marrow?
Yeah.
When
At
you
what
have
point?
to,
I want a
maybe?
timeline.
Would it be different for everybody though? When I'm hungry, I'm
Yeah, and I think there's some really interesting, probably groupthink that is part of this as well.
like, yeah, like the dancing plague. I reference that one a
Well, like
lot.
somebody's got to kind of
Initiate it
start,
as normalize it as
like,
okay.
this is the thing, and then everybody's going with it. It starts up with somebody somewhere,
It's documented throughout
or
history
everybody's
too.
thinking it, but somebody says it. It gets put into action at some point, and I just think that's really
So
fascinating to me.
it says that it's important to note that cannibalism is not a homogeneous behavior. It encompasses a range of practices, each with its own psychological basis. One of the major and fundamental questions is the motivation. If we view the act of cannibalism in regard to motivation, there are three categories: elucidated, so nutritional, ritual, and pathological. Nutritional cannibalism linked with needing calories.
Yeah,
Ritual cannibalism linked to cultural practices or spiritual.
yeah.
And then pathological cannibalism is rooted in psychopathology, which is the person's motivation to who's acutely psychotic or committing the act of cannibalism as like a paraphilia.
Well, I don't know if they're all psychotic. The guy you talked about that was eating the little kids, I don't
Well,
think he was psychotic.
no, well, and that's it's saying like they're saying there's these
Nor
three
was he
different
starving,
categories.
nor do I think it was part of a cultural practice, I think.
Which one? Wait, which one?
I
The
can't,
cabin fever?
Edward something. Fish? Is that his name?
Oh, yeah. Yep, yep,
Yeah,
that one.
that one.
That's true. But there's definitely something psychological there, like
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, but like, would I say give him the insanity plea? No, I would not say that.
No, no. Yeah, I mean, it definitely has. I'm gonna read this article and get back to you because this I
I'm
like it
so
because
just
it's coming
fascinated
from a
by
very
this
culturally
piece.
sensitive lens. Like it's talking
No, and I
about
like that. And I think I touched on
yeah,
that too when I did my topic, is that it's not taboo in every culture. It's taboo in our
yeah.
culture, in Western culture for sure. But a
And
lot of cultures it's not.
you have to be very sensitive to the kind of nuances between things like well, and just the sensationalism of cannibalism. It sounds really big and scary,
Yeah, it
but
sounds like
yeah.
horrific because everybody's always thinking, I guess like I was, like, what would it take to make me do that decision? That's kind of where my brain goes.
Right, right. And it makes it the focus on the horrors of the act versus, what about the famines and the hardships that's like for that community having to do some of those things as part of rituals. Like they're doing that specifically due to famines that are happening and their belief and culture is has set up those parameters of trying to assist and aid. So it's complex by all means. So,
It
I'm not,
is.
I don't want to condone it publicly on our podcast. Don't cannibalize, maybe.
Our until next time is not, encouraging that.
Yeah,
I would say
until
mine is be careful what you name your ships. I think it's important.
Right, right. Well, even calling something like the Wendigo psychosis, it's naming it after a group of peoples and calling it psychosis, but then also then saying it's not that.
Right. Words matter.
Words matter. All right. Bye.
Bye.